Meet Philip Fletcher, a visionary leader transforming the transportation industry. Philip has over 5 years of experience shaping the future as a key member of the TTSAO board, and now he's steering the association into an exciting new era. With a solid foundation as an operations manager, Philip has honed his experience in freight, team building, and cutting-edge training technologies like VR and AI simulators. He's a member of the Smart Freight Center and a contributor to groundbreaking research with NSERC and a proud member of the Hamilton Transportation Club. Get ready to hear from a true innovator shaping the future of transportation. So welcome, Philip. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm very excited to have you here, and a lot of the audience has also requested. If you could just maybe start off with telling us a little bit about yourself and the organization that you represent.
Okay, I'll be glad to do that. I started in the transportation business as a driver, and I drove for just about 12 years, did about 1.5 million miles. And through that time, I did a little bit of mentoring, training with new drivers in a similar truck. So we did a lot of transport deliveries for the automotive industry. And then at that point I realized, hey, I'm only helping one person at a time here. Maybe I can do a bit more. So then I applied to a trucking school and became an instructor for a few months, and then took over the school about 5 months later, and ran that school for 7 months before getting to the point where when Kim Richardson stepped down as president of TTSAO, they were looking for a new president, and I fit the bill because I guess it was because my background of being in the industry as a driver, running a school, being on the executive for years. I was treasurer for 4 years, so I had pretty intimate knowledge as to what goes on the association side.
Sorry, TTSAO, what does it stand for, just for the audience?
Oh, for the newbies in the audience, it's for the Truck Training Schools Association of Ontario. And I've had to repeat that a lot lately with TD Bank.
All right. Talk to me about a little bit of some of the challenges that you've had in 2024.
Very similar to what's going on for the transport companies is things have slowed down quite considerably, and we do have what I would call an over-proliferation of schools in the province. At the time that I got licensed just over 20 years ago, there were a total of 68 schools.
And now how many would you say there are approximately?
As of yesterday, with the information I got from Serco, 266.
That's just in Ontario?
Yeah, mostly in Peel, to be honest. We have Peel has a huge representation of the trucking schools.
So the challenges that you faced is the amount of schools. There's just too many of them for the amount of people that are looking to get licensed, or?
That's generally the thought, and what has happened with that situation is that we've had a huge rate war, as you probably realize from trucking, that the more entrants there are in a particular sector, the lower the prices tend to go in order for them to get business. And one of the disturbing things I saw in November was one of the schools putting out a Black Friday deal for $3,000 for an AZ.
Wow. And that's what, for the full program from start to finish?
Well, that would be the idea, I would think.
Unbelievable.
So that's pretty hard to do because our schools, when we canvass them, the cost per running an hour of training is anywhere from $108 to $130. So averages at about $122.
And mandatory is how many hours?
32 in the truck.
In the truck.
To do 3,000, you're well below what you're going to be able to accomplish if you're training correctly and staying to the regulations.
Right. Of these schools, how many of them are a part of the TTSAO?
We have 51 campuses.
Oh, nice.
So we have a sizable, considerable amount. We don't look to expand generally because it takes a lot of requirements to become a school that is qualified to be a TTSAO school. We're only trying to take schools that have the best record and best ability to train and provide professional drivers. But once again, when you think of our course, it's a drop in the bucket to how many hours somebody's going to be in the truck anyway with the course. So we want to start them off with a proper foundation and get that foundation right so that they can build upon that when they get to their carrier of choice or who will be hiring them. They can onboard them correctly and continue that process of them becoming a learned professional driver.
Got it. And just to give some context, right now, in order to get licensed in Ontario, in order for me to get a Class 1 license, what is the requirement? How much do I have to do in school training versus in the truck? So 30-something hours you said we got to do in the truck.
Yeah, 32 hours in the truck, 18 in the yard. The rest of the 103.5 is on theoretic progression. And then you have to have your whole course sent over to MTO by the school prior to you taking on the test at a Serco Drive Test Center. And the Serco Drive Test Center will be checking on 5 different things. They check on your ability to do the component check, which is Schedule 1.
Yep.
To do backing up, which you have to do within a period of 10 minutes to put it between the cones properly. On the road, and also coupling uncoupling. So those things come into check very carefully, and if you can get them with a minimum number of faults, then you'll pass. But right now, the number I got yesterday from Serco was their average is 60% pass rate, so 40% don't pass. And that's either on the first, second, or third time try as well.
Is that considered high? 40% don't pass? If you look at the stats maybe from 10 years ago or 12 years, is that considered on the high side? Or?
I don't really have a comparable on that, so I can't really give you anything with credibility for that number.
But 40% don't pass their test.
Right.
Okay. And then they would just have to retake the test.
Yes. So sometimes you have to wait up to 6-7 weeks to retake that test. Depending on the school's ability to get a block booking, they can insert you in and get you in a little faster. Because one of the things you realize is when you're not training and not learning, your skills become into an erosion and you start losing them pretty quickly, especially when they're new skills.
The driver's ability to get jobs after they finish the MELT program, is that getting harder and harder or easier and easier, like to find placements for these drivers?
Definitely harder and harder right now.
Harder, okay.
Yeah, as we see the slowdown in the industry right now, where companies that are looking for drivers are generally only looking for drivers that have already been on the road for 3+ years, because there are drivers out there that meet that criteria. So you don't have to hire as many new drivers to infill your seats. However, there are still some companies that will bring in new drivers because they feel that they can work with them, they don't have bad habits, and they can bring them along in their way of doing things. And I think that's a good procedure to have if you're running a carrier business.
For sure, yeah. I mean, you would definitely have to have the right infrastructure in order to do it. So you have to have the proper, driver trainers for that, and it's not just a 1-week thing or a 2-week thing or the things that I hear that some companies are doing. But I think we used to do it. I think it was a 4-month thing, a 4-month program. But we found that the drivers just don't have the patience for the 4 months, meaning they'll work a month or 2 months and they want to go solo, and they're like, oh, I got a couple of months under my belt, so I'll just go somewhere else. And then we just scrapped the entire program. We're like, forget it. You know what? 3 years minimum for this company, and we don't want to deal with these things, just because we found the repetition between newly licensed drivers. Do you see that in other companies also, or was it just something that we?
It's generally something you see pretty prevalently. And when I was driving, and I'd go through a 1-week training course, and a lot of that would be in class, and you're there with maybe 15 to 20 other new drivers in that course. I've always found that once I started looking around about 3 months later, I couldn't find anybody else that was still with the company from that point. There's such great turnover in those early stages that it's really hard for a carrier to make sure that you have somebody that's willing to work with you. I find the mentorship program we're doing right now, where somebody is coupled with a mentor for a fixed period of time until they recover all of their skill sets that they need to have for that certain carrier and whatever their products are that they're having. That could be anywhere from 200 to 400 extra hours. And we think we have a very good mentorship program with that. And then you have a tie-in with a senior driver that's willing to answer questions with a new driver. And the retention on that seems to be picking up quite a bit more than what we just outlined in that scenario.
Nice. Well, that's good to hear. There has been recent, I saw on a couple of news channels, this huge bust in the GTA with driving schools that got caught for not doing the mandatory 130,
103.5.
sorry, 103.5. Can you tell us a little bit from your eyes, what transpired and how you saw this whole thing unfold?
I was glad to see that unfold because you keep hearing all kinds of rumors about it transpiring, and nobody's really willing to nail down the actual evidence in order to put some of the schools out. Although I'll hand it to MCU, they've been much harder on the schools lately, and we have more schools being suspended or actually folded.
Is it because of your pressure that you're putting on them, you think? Or
We,
why all of a sudden they're...
It's not just our pressure. I think the whole industry has been contributing to the pressure. It's something that we want to, that's part of the advocacy of having an organization like ours in the training sector, is to have that advocacy to put pressure on, but there's a lot more pressure out there. And I'm sure you are well aware of the carriers saying that there's a problem with some of these schools sending the students out that are unprepared to handle the rigors of the job.
Oh, for sure. I mean, we've had, I would say, hundreds of road tests where a driver would come in he's licensed, but I have no clue how in the world, that driver got a license. It's impossible that he passed a road test anywhere.
Isn't that disturbing?
It's extremely disturbing because my family and kids are on the road with drivers like that. So if anybody was to recruit a driver like that, and there are a lot of companies that would recruit without a road test, that's a problem for everybody.
It really is. You need a quality road test in order to uncover some of these things too. And you can't just brush through a very quick road test and say everything's done in 30 minutes, because we like to go with a 2-hour road test when we do road tests for companies that are under our jurisdiction. And we test everything out. And you can get it from even the body language of the prospective driver as they are approaching the vehicle and how they first take on the rigors of doing that road test. Sometimes you can't get out of the yard because they can't do a proper circle check. And that is a problem with our course right now, is we do component checks for Schedule 1, which is not a full circle check. So there's a whole difference between doing this at a drive test center and doing a circle check for employment. It's a vastly different thing, and it's not normally covered in the 103.5, and that's why we have a 200-hour course too.
Well, we found that most of our drivers that fail, 50% of them will fail because of the pre-trip inspection, that they won't do a thorough pre-trip inspection and will fail them. It doesn't matter how good you are on the road. Because we found that, common, like that personality that won't do a pre-trip, you'll have a lot of problems while they're on the road with the truck and the maintenance because of that. So more breakdowns, more, a lot more towing bills with drivers that don't do proper pre-trips, because you can find a lot of the problems in the pre-trip. When a driver doesn't do the thorough pre-trip, that's when you have, a lot more expenses.
Yeah, you can pick up a minor defect instead of allowing it to advance to a major defect. And if you're doing a proper road test, you'd want to do your air brake checks too, and we find that's something that's not covered adequately by most places. And when I was doing driver meetings, we would always work on doing air brake checks and even doing like the 6-pack and teaching that, so that people get a little better idea on how to manage their air brake system, because you're traveling down the road at 80 kilometers an hour with 80,000 pounds. It takes a lot of braking power to stop that properly and not shift the load or do something worse.
Nice. If ET Transport wanted to open up tomorrow a truck driving school, how easy would it be for us?
Not overly difficult. I was actually with Chet, which is owned by Musket Transport, and that was the first one to come through the normal channels back in 1993. Things are a little easier now, and it's a much more normal situation for a transport company to open up a school. And I think for a lot of expanding carriers, that answers a need into having new drivers come in that are trained in the way that the carrier needs them to be trained. And at the moment, you wouldn't be able to do it because there's a freeze on.
Oh, nice.
And that's a relatively new thing, but it's happening over the last 4 to 5 months, that there are no new campuses opening up in Ontario.
So anybody that submits an application, it's just there's a freeze on it?
Yes.
Okay, that's a good thing. It's a very good thing.
It's a good thing, although there are some quality schools that have invested in outfitting a new location and having a very good campus that still can't open either. So
Oh,
that's that's part of a negative fallout of what you just described as a pretty good thing.
For me, when I say pretty good thing, it's something has to stop. You need to start analyzing what you have. Where is the failure, or what's happening, or what's going wrong? Because there's a lot going wrong right now with drivers getting licensed that shouldn't be licensed. To analyze it, to put maybe new rules, new red tape, new regulations in place, and then to continue with the program. But I mean, 103 hours. If I think about, what would it take for me to be a licensed electrician or a licensed plumber, or the way to get to become a licensed plumber or electrician. I mean, there's 4,000, 5,000 hours involved in that, and here we are with 103 hours, and somebody can just take an 80,000-pound machine and go on the roads with it. Like it's disproportionate.
So Ronan, look at it this way. I'm going to make a point to give you a little bit more credence to what you just said. Mm-hmm. With the 32 hours behind the wheel, if they get all of that at a 103.5-hour course, when they're out and have their first job, the first 3 days on the job will exceed what they just had for training in 3 days.
That doesn't make sense in any way, shape, or form that you look at it. So why hasn't the rules changed over the last, I don't know, when was this MELT program put in place?
2017. It came in July of 2017. Uh-huh. In November of 2022, we all received a package that they're revamping the MELT standard and looking at making some serious changes to it. That has been sitting on the shelf at Queen's Park since November of 2022. We are now being asked to do this revamp at this point in time, and it doesn't look like there will be much change there. Now, TTSAO headed up a group of stakeholders to take a look at offering input and ideas through a white paper to the MTO through last summer. That has just been completed, and we're going to see what happens when it goes to the government, and the government can take a look at it. They are doing some things.
If you were able to put more rules in place, what would you put in place to make the industry better, or to make our truck drivers more qualified? What are some of the things that you would implement?
Well, I think an easy implementation from this point on would be a mentorship program where no matter where you're going, when you finish your initial licensing for Class AZ, you go somewhere where there's a mentorship program or a finishing program, however it wants to be called, where there's another amount of hours in order to bring that person up to speed with an experienced trainer through the carrier that's going to usher them in to understand the paperwork, how to deal with the customers at the locations, how to look after your truck, how to do your proper trip planning, how to look after your dangerous goods, and making sure that they're in compliance every day. And the one that we have has 59 points of compliance that are reported on every day to the carrier and to the insurer. So I think that would be an easy transition to.
So does that mean, like, I remember when I was 16, I got my G1, and then after I got my G1, I got my G2, and then with my G1 I can only drive with my parents, or a licensed driver for 4. It was 6 or 7 months or 8 months before I could get my G2 from my G1.
Right.
And then to get my full G, I had to wait. I think it was a couple of years until I got my full G. So something like that within the trucking. So first you would get a license to be able to work with somebody, and then get a full license?
Yeah, I worked with OTA that was on our stakeholder group for the white paper, and they're talking about the graduated licensing for commercial licenses. And that has a lot of merit because, as you know from your personal experience, you go through stages to acquire that extra level of being able to do more with your license. They're talking about getting a finishing license when you go to a carrier with that specific equipment. And that would only be specific to that piece of equipment. If you change jobs and go to another one, you'd have to get an acquired ability to handle that extra bit of equipment. So you're going from dry vans to a bulk carrier, then you'd have to get certified again on that certain piece of equipment. So that has a lot of meaning as well too. I think that would be a good thing overall for the industry. I don't know how it would affect the schools because that would take some of the role of the schools away, but we are still foundational even in that aspect. So I think as a foundational projection, a graduated licensing program could work. I hear there's an awful lot of resistance to it so far, but there's a lot of benefits to having that, as you have outlined. And as we can see, acquiring skills for certain pieces of equipment is very valuable. And I think that might even help with the retention too, because somebody would have to go through another skill building session with a different carrier for that different equipment. I think that would help with retention. I think it answers a lot of needs, but I don't know if it answers all the needs.
We've heard in the last little bit that there was a truck driving school that's been around forever. I think it was the Humber College, that they're no longer, I think it was as of December was the last month or January?
They're done as of now.
They're done as of now. There's a school that used to do things the right way. And I think their fees were, you weren't going to get by with a $3,000 or $4,000 fee there. It was at least, I think, $8,000 or $9,000, if not $10,000.
Right.
But that school closed down. A school that did things 100% the way that they were supposed to. The trucking school, the trucking side of it, they shut it down. What do you think? What do you think led to that, or why is it?
Well, it's pretty easy to determine that was a competition with lower rates, and the cost of, as you know, the cost of running trucks and the insurance and parking in the GTA,
And proper instructors.
paying instructors, all of that has gone up. Paying your property taxes, all of that has been an increasing cost. Fuel, another one, insurance. So it's an increasing cost and burdensome when you have larger numbers in your fleet, which that's what Humber was up against. And then all of this outside competition where people are saying we can do it for $3,500, we can do it for $3,000 if you come in on Black Friday. So this is all contributing to the fact that a well-established, well-set up organization, as you would have in a community college like Humber, cannot afford to deal with that rationalization of the competition, lowering prices to such a degree because it hurts your input so much. And they even had the benefit of having OSAP for their fees.
Unbelievable. So it's like the companies that are doing it the right way are at a disadvantage versus other companies that are doing it, they're cutting corners. And I'm seeing more and more of that, not just in the trucking schools, also with the trucking companies, with the whole Driver Inc. thing. It's like, the bad apples are getting away with it. There's no restrictions on it. There's no enforcement of the law. And I think that's a huge problem within our industry, whether it's, getting licensed or running a trucking company. That enforcement piece is not there.
It's not there. And I was feeling pretty buoyed by the fact that the last budget that was brought in by the Ford government allocated $15 million towards enforcement for our level of schools and for all the schools through MCU. And it really has had no impact. And you would be surprised if I asked you to try and guess the number of inspectors there are for all the private career colleges. And we have 266 schools, and we represent about 45% of all the private career colleges in Ontario. How many inspectors do you think there are to go out and oversee these schools on a regular basis?
I would guess probably 2.
Well, fortunately, it's 8.
There's 8 inspectors.
8.
If I asked you the 68 schools that you have currently, how often do they get audited or inspected?
We go after them on a regular basis. I go out to see the schools individually, except for the one in Thunder Bay, which is a little difficult to get to.
No, I'm talking about an inspector.
Oh, we get inspected once a year by MCU.
Okay.
That's a paper inspection. So they're just taking
so they're not coming on site to make sure they have the facility, to make sure that they have a boardroom, the classroom where they're teaching.
They come on site and they ask for the paperwork, and they may set up perhaps a desk in the classroom, and they just go over the paperwork that you have. If everything is lined up properly, you're doing the proper reporting as you should.
Got it.
But it doesn't take into account the type of equipment that is being used to be taught on. Doesn't look at any kind of yard safety. I've been at a fast food restaurant in Brampton where I've seen somebody teaching a student to back up the truck in the back of the fast food restaurant. That's not a really safe one. Another one I've seen is I was at a very commercial establishment. There was two large commercial buildings side by side, and there was a truck training school using the yard there. And in between the two large buildings, they were teaching coupling, uncoupling, and component checks with all the traffic from those two vehicles or two large companies traversing back and forth between there while this was going on. That is not a safe environment for any kind of teaching environment. You've got somebody outside the truck walking around. And there's too many of these situations going on. It's kind of like looking at an oversaturation point that maybe Tim Hortons Donuts, you've got a Tim Hortons Donuts on every single corner as you're driving into work. That's about where we are with how many truck training schools there are in certain areas in Ontario right now.
What would you like to see happen with these inspectors? What would you like to see them do differently? What would you like to see them, go into a facility? How would you change their inspection?
Well, we were at Queen's Park with a delegation of the stakeholders that are really affected by this, and it was OTA was there, and we suggested that the inspectors couple with an MTO person to go and do the inspection. Maybe not necessarily at the same time, but one can handle the paperwork, which is what MCU does very well now. And then the other MTO inspector can handle, he knows what's going on with the trucking part. Go and inspect the trucks, inspect the yard, make sure the trucks have a maintenance schedule. Let's take a look
Just
at
one
that.
second. So you're telling me that the current inspector has no idea if there's a defect on the truck? He wouldn't know?
They're going to hairdressers next after they've been doing it at that school. They might know where there's a defect on somebody's haircut.
Wow. Okay. So they have no idea how to run a trucking company or what is a truck driving school or anything to do with trucking. They're just there to monitor the paperwork and the class and the... Okay.
Yeah, just the office stuff.
So you would say that they're not qualified to do the job that they're doing, or they should be partnering up with a more qualified...
Well, they're qualified to do what's being expected of them at this point in time. There's nothing wrong with that. Some of them are very good at this. Some have been doing it for years, and they are good and qualified at checking out the paperwork. They haven't been asked to do more. They haven't been asked to be trained in how to assess vehicle fitness or reports on maintenance, or even what the trailer makeup looks like, and if the trailer meets the criteria that you're supposed to have for that type of level of training. So you could have a 32-foot trailer in there. How many 32-foot trailers do you see out here normally going around?
You don't.
So you have to have somebody that knows what the actual qualifications are for the equipment. Check the equipment, make sure it's sound, it doesn't have defects, is not prone to defects, has actual maintenance on it on a regular basis. And you know yourself right now, anytime your vehicles have to go in for work, it's like costing you $3,000 to go in and just get minimal work done on a vehicle anymore.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
And if the school's only charging that, there goes the one enrollment fee for one student. So you have to put all of these costs into what you're doing in order to have a successful training establishment. And then you also need qualified instructors. So we've set up an instructor certification program now that we've laid on from the CVTA, which is the Commercial Vehicle Training Association in the US. We're using theirs and overlaying it with TTSAO training right now.
Wow.
And we're setting out to have all of our instructors properly and professionally trained, and our goal is to get them through level 1 here by the end of this year.
Nice. So you are seeing things moving in the right direction?
They are moving in the
Slowly,
right direction.
but they are moving in the right direction.
That's right. It's probably not happening as fast as any of us would like to, but then again, from a governance standpoint, I understand that there's a reluctance to go willy-nilly full force ahead with changes, because all the unintended consequences may start coming out very quickly for them. So they're being very measured in what they're doing, and they are starting to take steps, which up until now really hasn't been happening, but I'm so glad to see that that's actually moving in the right direction now.
Well, that's great news. It's really good to hear. As a carrier, I'm actually really thrilled that things are going to be moving in the right direction, especially with the licensing. What else would you change about the if you were to be able to put another rule in place? What would something else be?
Well, I would like to see them go to what we consider our gold standard, having a minimum of 200-hour course, because you get so much more behind. You're doing behind the wheel for 50 hours. You're doing yard for 50 hours. There's like what your total course was before under a MELT program. So we would like to see them do that. Most jurisdictions that have put in a MELT subsequent to Ontario have put it in above the Ontario rate. So we're kind of low on the totem pole right now for how many hours of training are required. So we should reevaluate that. I would like to see us go to something much more close to 200. The white paper is going to put it in at 145 hours, which is a nice boost. It's like over 40% increase in training with a lot of emphasis on being behind the wheel. And behind the wheel training is really essential to being competent out on the road.
Oh, for sure, yeah. Have you seen anyone's license get revoked ever? Because
Yeah.
I feel, oh, you have. Okay. What would have to take place in order for a license to get revoked right now?
Okay, are you talking about the license for a school or for an individual driver that's
No,
been
for
at
the
one of
school.
these
Sorry,
schools?
for the school.
Okay, so yeah, there's been a number of them that have had problems. So when they get complaints, the whole reaction of MCU is complaint driven. So when complaints come in, they will investigate the complaints. And if they see the complaint is doing things where somebody is fudging the amount of training, and a school that will have their license revoked will have the student come in, sign each part of their training before the training is actually given, and then not deliver that training at all or even just in part. And so a student complaint coming in on that, if they can come out and get that verified, then that school will have its charter revoked.
Wow. Okay. I feel like a lot of the audience or the drivers, they don't know that they're able to file a complaint against the school. I didn't know that. I know whenever I do my videos and I talk about truck driving school, and I try to steer away from it because there's a lot of comments coming in about this school, that school, and tons of schools that are not doing things 100% the way they should be, and you can actually read in the comments things that happened. But I don't think people know where to complain, or where do you complain about a bad apple here in Ontario?
Through MCU, take your complaint directly to the Ministry of Colleges and Universities.
And that would trigger like an audit or an inspection?
That'll trigger a response.
A response.
So the response will be to investigate that, and it may be a direct response or it may be indirect if they have evidence that they can look at that's not privy to the school itself. If a student brings forth a lesson like I just talked about where it's been all pre-signed, then that is very good information. And I saw a school that had 24 trucks out on the road at training, and they had their charter revoked.
Wow.
So this does happen. It happened to a school that used to be a member of TTSAO. We revoked their membership for certain bad actions that we were able to confirm, and yet they were still advertising that they were a member, and one of them actually made it to being on the CBC Marketplace course, that program that aired in November.
Oh, wow.
So that sort of stuff still hangs around. And I have one other school that used to be a member that we took off the membership rolls, again, for various reasons. And they're still saying that, and they're ignoring a cease and desist order that we have in, so I've put it on our website that they are not a member for anybody to go there. But does every student know where to look for this information before they sign up?
No.
There needs to be more information on that. We have to do some sort of advertising where we get the word out. Investigate the schools before you go there. There is a key performance indicator that you can look at through MCU, and you can see what that school is providing for percentage of school students finishing their school program, getting a job, and staying within the industry after a year.
So to our audience, 1/3 of our audience is people that want to come into the industry. What advice would you tell them, or how would you search for a qualified trucking school?
Well, the last thing I just mentioned there with the key performance indicator, that's one thing to look at too. And that's very unbiased because it's done by the government. There are ways of gaining that. If you have a very small group of students that come through in a year, you might be able to get 100% compliance there because you only had 15 students come through. Or if you're looking at the larger schools, you could see some advertising that they advertise generally. They'd have larger student cohorts coming through. And you could look at their KPI on MCU and find out what percentage are getting through to finish their course, what percent are graduating the course, and what percent are getting hired. The information is out there, but it's hard to find.
Yeah, I feel like if I was looking for a truck driving school, the first thing I do is I go to Google and write, truck driving school, Ontario. And that's when you have, a lot of people that are paying on the cost per click to be on top of, other people, and it's like it's a bidding war over there. But that information on whether or not they're qualified or not qualified, or if they do a good job, I feel like that's missing, that piece. Can they go on your website to see, your 68 schools that you approve of?
Yeah, our website has all of our schools, and we monitor and try to stay on top of our schools.
Okay.
And we have a pretty difficult audit for them to come in. It's kind of audit that I described to you that I would like to see the government doing. That's the one that we do now in order to accept a new school, and then every once in a while they have to reapply and replenish that audit.
So you feel comfortable sending a driver to any one of your 68 schools?
I do at the present time because we are staying on top of them. We try to monitor them, and certainly if I hear any complaints, then a complaint that comes across my desk is handled immediately. So that might be preliminary to going to the ministry, and I try to work with the student in that. I was once the chairman of the Better Business Bureau of South Central Ontario, so I have a little bit of experience in how to handle complaints and mediating. So we try to make sure that we have some experience in looking after that situation for a student that's having a problem at a school.
Oh, nice. Okay. Well, listen, I really hope the industry, from what I'm hearing, is definitely leading towards a better future for us. Do you think that the change in government would affect at all these changes, or how fast these changes would get implemented?
I really don't think so, although there's a contingent of NDP members up north that have to face the prospect of dealing with the Trans-Canada on 11 and 17. And I stay plugged in with that on Facebook, the Facebook page 11 and 17 Highway Kills. And that outlines all the problems up there. And that is still a problematic area. And they are very motivated to try and change safety on the highways. If NDP came in, they might be able to do that, but you would have to have the full backing of the voting public in order to have that happen. Yeah. And we'll see what happens to that. I do think some of these things are happening. They did propose something about the 1 year wait on a full G before. That is now being adopted. And the stakeholder groups that I'm affiliated with, we are pushing hard to get other things in there right now. We had a meeting in November with Minister Sarkaria and Minister Piccini from Labour, and we're getting some things going on there. They said that they can react to it, and they're open-minded now. So I think we have a government that's still willing to do some things now. It may be happening slower than we would like to see because we know what the results are on the highway. But they are moving in the right direction, and as you said, maybe it's time to feel a little bit more confident that they're willing to undertake change in order to create positive action out there on the roads.
Yeah. I just feel like they need a little bit of pressure in order to make change, and in order to do that, I mean, that's what the channels are for. I feel like, with channels and with uniting our industry, whether it's the trucking industry or the trucking schools, but uniting our industry, now you have a bigger voice, and when you have a bigger voice, you can actually drive change. So with the channel now having close to about 600,000 subscribers across the platforms, I feel like it can definitely start pushing things in the right direction, and that's why I like to invite and to talk to presidents like yourself that are trying to make change and to try to maybe boost that a little bit more with the pressure of the entire industry.
And that is so needed because you need to have a groundswell of support from the voting public in order to push items in the right direction, because then they'll respond when they realize that there are votes behind it, and there's a looming election coming forward in Ontario, as we know there is
Yep.
nationally as well. But
Well,
that is
we're
gonna-
trying to get Pierre in here, to tell you the truth. I'm trying to get him in here because there's a lot happening within trucking, and I'd love to hear some of his feedback on what he has to say or what changes he would bring to our industry.
Yeah, that would be great, and you would have so many questions. You might have to have a full afternoon for that.
We would try to limit it to 1 hour, but for sure, yeah. I mean, we're definitely open to it.
Yeah, and I think that's the way we have to go. The more pressure we can have in bringing to light all these areas that don't normally hear about it. Everybody takes it for granted that they go to the store and there's goods on the shelves and they can just go and buy what they're used to buying, and there's no shortage and there's nothing missing there other than the price has gotten a little higher. And that's taken for granted by most people. They don't realize what's happening. When I was teaching and had my school, the opening thing I'd say to a class when I had them in the classroom the first day is, I'll give you 60 seconds to come up with something that you've used in the last week that was never on a truck.
You won't find anything. Nope.
The best answer I had was an electronic ticket. I said, well, didn't that come on your phone? Where do you think the phone came from?
Yeah, no, you wouldn't be able to find everything comes on a truck.
At some point in time, everything's on a truck.
Well, listen, I really wanted to thank you for coming down, for giving me the time. I really appreciate it.
Well, this is a special thing to get the word out too, and I'm glad to tell you there's some positive things that are happening in the industry right now, that the efforts of yourself and like-minded individuals is actually having some effect, and we're moving in the right direction at long last. And I think we're being heard and responded to. And the fact that ministers are willing to have us sit in there and have a meeting and listen and start to react, and
It's already a step in the right direction.
that's a step in the right direction. And I'm participating as of next Wednesday, so I think we are having some impact, and things are moving ahead now.